at the camera because we've got people joining us online. I'm looking at the room because we've got people here with us in person in Bristol. But hello to everyone, wherever you are, here or abroad. In the audience, yeah, we've got people from around Bristol, but online we've got people from island states such as the Maldives and St. Lucia. Welcome. Elsewhere in the world, from Australia, Rhonda DeBase, I think, is there, and the United States. Terra's mom is with us, I believe. So hello, Terra's mom. So what do I want to say? I want to say how pleased I am to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Terra Sprague, long-time member of our Comparative and International Research Centre, long-term member of our Education in Small States Research Group, and really for many years also the Deputy Director of our Small States Research Group. So it's a real pleasure that Terra is doing this session for us. It could be the last one for this academic year here in the Northern Hemisphere. Terra's bio for today, she's written her own little piece out, which I think is on the website, which do have a look at. But the thing she wanted to emphasise there, and I'm going to read the words that she's put down, is lecturer in education and researcher on environmental change and resilience with special interest in the human-earth relationship. And I think I wanted to say those exact words because that captures the spirit of everything that I know you're going to do for us today. Now, I've long been impressed by Terra's, it's a passionate move into these areas of environmental and arts-based priorities as I see it, and approaches to research that fit that arts-based and environmental approaches and priorities in research. So I hope everyone enjoys this session. We're going to do 40 minutes with Terra speaking to us and using her slides and presentation, then 20 minutes for questions and discussion. We're going to record the session for anybody who can't be with us. And there are plenty of people around the globe who would like to be here and couldn't make it at this particular time. And I'm going to hand over to Terra now and let you give your title and introduce your session. Thank you very much. I'll disappear into the chair seat, okay, wherever that might be.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yes, thank you very much. I was reflecting on the fact that I've been in this room in a lot of different ways over the years, and it feels really nice to be particularly in this space because it was this room that I think I had my very first master's class. That would have been in 2016 when I first came to Bristol. So this is like the perfect place to be sharing this. I know I've guest lectured for Angeline in this room on similar topics, so worked with people in this room, and it's just really nice to be in this space. I want to say hi to everybody who's online as well. My mom is here, and also friends from across Bristol and further afield. And I know a lot of people have asked for the recording, so to say hello to people who are watching as well. I also want to say hello to the land as part of my kind of relationship with Earth and acknowledge where we are here in Bristol and in Berkeley Square near Brandon Hill. I want to say hello to the land where I grew up in Chautauqua County in upstate New York, Island, United States. And I want to say hello to the land and the knowledge keepers, particularly from the 3 large ocean states where the stories that I'm sharing are coming from. And that's from Fiji, St. Lucia, and Mauritius. So I'm going to be sharing Mangrove stories of large ocean state Thrutopia, and I'll hopefully explain what all of those things mean as I go along. Let us dive us straight into the opening story from the novel. So I'm going to be sharing with you excerpts from a novel that I'm writing, which is a way of my sharing my doctoral research. So I'll talk more about that process of shifting from academic writing into fictional writing. But I'm going to just start us off with the opening sequence of the novel, and then I'll go through what we're going to cover in the whole session. So about 5-minute reading from the story. So we're in Mauritius, and there's 2 speakers here, Strife and The city bus travels through the tunnel, making it stop by the stone wall supporting the overhead traffic above. Lattice of concrete and steel reminds me of being under the L in Chicago, but I'm thousands of miles away in the capital city of Mauritius, Indian Ocean. The daylight streams down onto the road from between the rafters as I hop off the bus and collect my bicycle from the back before the bus is off to its next stop, coastline. Pleasantly warm, and the rain from the recent downpour hangs heavy in the air. Take a moment to breathe in the humidity. And so dry here in recent weeks, and the petrichor, that smell of fresh rain on the ground, intoxicating. One other cyclist getting off the bus with me, and she doesn't look like she's from here either. Hey, nice bike, say, admiring the sturdy and unique frame, bold white and black design reminiscent of a high-def painting. Not so many cyclists here. I'm glad they let us on the bus with our bikes. Me too. I'm Akula, she says with a warm smile, the sun glinting off the abalone shell labret in her bottom lip. Strafe, nice to meet you. Reply as we hop on our bicycles and start up the road. In early morning, folks are making their way to work, most heading down to the harborside market to sell their wares. Hula and I travel in tandem for a while, cycling away from the overhead traffic and the fray of people. As we get clear of the busyness, the road gently rising above underpass tunnel, there is a roaring noise from behind us. And hear a clamor of cries and the sound of sheer panic. Looking over my shoulder, I see a torrent of water pummeling through the underpass, bringing with it people who were moments ago walking. A city bus follows on an artificial tide, full of passengers agonizingly pressed to the windows, terror in their eyes, trapped in a waterlogged bus turntable, sense of this flash flood that came without warning. Brown muddy water is gushing everywhere, mixed with discarded plastic waste. What's happening? Screaming to Akula, who hasn't stopped to watch the scene and is pedaling fast ahead. Follow me, she shouts. Unsure why I take her instruction, feeling like a coward for fleeing the scene and doing nothing to help, but instead pedaling fast out of the city. Confronted with uncertainty and confusion, a dozen questions racing through my mind, I hear her repeat, "Follow me," as though she can hear my doubt. "Need you over here." Pedal furiously, following a stranger I know nothing about, as she races away from the scene of the carnage and onto a green metal bridge, 3 traffic lanes wide and rising steeply up over a river flanked by mangrove trees. I can see the water below as my bicycle tires move over the honeycomb of metal. Reaching speeds never before felt on my bicycle, I'm propelled ever faster forward. "Watch out for the gaps!" Hula shouts back at me. Only moments before, I glimpse the tree-sized holes of the metal bridge. I realize that I'm not longer pedaling or controlling the speed, but can only steer to avoid plummeting into the river. Hula has reached the other side of the bridge and is now racing beside a canal, and I'm losing sight of her as she weaves between apartment buildings on the overpopulated water. "Where be gone?" Hear myself shouting as I sit bolt-upright up in bed. Surrounded by darkness, with my urgent voice echoing off the earthen walls of the folly surrounding my bed, I rub my eyes, how to regain my bearings. At home. Deep breath. I remember. When the Pacific was the other climate change conference. Yet why can I hear the rushing of a Mauritian flash flood in my ears? Urgent voice of my Samoan host breaks through the still reverberating dream sound of floodwaters in my ears, her fist pounded on my door. There's no time to ponder on the dream, as the wind outside rips open the Venetian-style blinds which serve as windows. Waking self, middle of a tropical storm. So this is, it's a story about, if you know the history of Mauritius, you'll know about flash flooding being quite regular. You might know about episodes that have happened where people have died in the city center. And so in a way, this opening sequence brings together stories that I heard in my doctoral fieldwork, but also merges it with a dream that I actually had. And so this is how the novel opens up. Then I go on to unpack after each kind of excerpt. I'm going on through dialogue to unpack what's going on. So this is what we're going to do in the session today. I'm going to introduce you to the main characters of the novel and talk briefly about my PhD thesis, give you an overview of what that was about and how I use narrative inquiry in my work. I'm going to read a second excerpt from the novel, which is from Fiji, and it features a crab, a Klipa crab. And then I'm going to kind of pause again and talk about some of the influences and the concepts that have underpinned this work, Thrutopia and novella, and then speak briefly about the process of moving from academic publishing into writing fiction in the non-academic publishing world. And then I'll conclude with a third sequence from St. Lucia about rainwater harvesting and talk briefly about what's coming next in my trajectory with the work. Okay, so you've met briefly Strafe, the cyclist, the main protagonist, who is a researcher, and Akula, who is a Haida dogfish woman. So Haida is a culture from the Northwest Pacific, an island nation, and the dogfish woman is a part of their creation myth. And she features heavily in the doctoral thesis. I work with her a lot in the doctoral thesis to kind of unpack the stories, and she's my critical friend and really helps me to question the work that I'm doing and the stories that I'm bringing out. And so she's very much a feature of the novel as well. The mangroves, the mangrove forest speaks a lot in the thesis, in the novel, and they're a metaphor for the multiplicity of resilience. If you know anything about mangrove forests and the amazing ecosystem services that they provide, it's easy to be in awe of a mangrove tree. And then there are some other minor characters that pop up throughout the novel, but they're usually part of the mangrove sequences. So my PhD thesis was about conversing with island mangroves. I submitted it back in 2019, and it's largely a narrative inquiry. And the kinds of questions that I was asking in this work in Fiji, St. Lucia, and Mauritius were about what are the pressing concerns about climate change from the islander perspective. What do they feel are the pressing environmental concerns that they're being faced with from the sharp end of all of this? And how do they understand resilience? And what do they want to share to non-islanders and islanders about what to do in the age of the Anthropocene? So on top of building on all of that is this document that is about an old story. It's the old story of humanity's relationship with the earth that isn't serving us anymore. That is about domination, disposability, and intention to equilibrium. And in the thesis, I argue that we need a new story about our relationship with the earth, and that is how we address the Anthropocene, the state of time that we find ourselves in today, and the state of climate change. So that's kind of the main argument of the thesis. And I use narrative inquiry in my work. It's about the importance of story. It's about the importance of the lived experience. And there's a link here to a webinar called Unintended Methodologies that myself and Dr. Njawu Klingbu-Bolis gave as part of the TESIF research project, in which we talk about the methodologies that we've used in our work, which we maybe didn't mean to. I hadn't thought about when I started my doctoral work using narrative inquiry. And in that seminar, I talk about the shift to narrative inquiry and why. And give another reading from the mangroves of St. Lucia. So I won't go into that any further, but basically, what came naturally to me in doing the thesis and analyzing the interviews and focus groups with over 70 people was to write dialogues and put those people in conversation with one another, even though we didn't have a focus group. It was to kind of retrospectively create a focus group and to write dialogues, and all of the quotations from what the Mangrove says in the thesis is direct quotations from the participant. That's briefly how I do the process. And then I produce layered texts. So in the thesis, it's, there are some standard academic texts to explain the theoretical framework and the methods, but the most part of the thesis is a combination of conversations with that dogfish woman. Those are really analytical discussions. There's 3 Sakotas, which is an indigenous Aitoke concept from the Pacific about taking a journey with the intention of coming back and giving back. So there are 3 fictionalized metaphorical accounts like that. And then largely it's conversations with the Mangrove, which as I said, are participant quotations. Okay, I want to now bring you to Fiji and tell you another excerpt from the novel. So what I'm doing with the novel basically is expand or like elongating some of the conversations that I had in the field, or bringing in to the novel things that I wasn't able to do in the thesis. Okay, so this is a good example of that. The anecdote about the crab itself does appear in the thesis, but all of the kind of character development around it is new. So we are in Fiji now, and we're going to hear Strafe, that protagonist, Akula, the dogfish woman, and the Mangrove speaking here. So this one's a little bit longer. First voice you'll hear will be the mangrove forest. Maybe we should tell her the kuka crab story, Akula. Whisper rose again. It will help her understand the laughter she heard earlier on her walk here. What matter is bothering her, said somehow omnisciently. We'll have to convince her to submerge, though, Akula responded over her shoulder. I doubt she's capable of that yet. She's still shaken up from the flash flood experience and barely made it over the bridge this morning. Telkins did a less than complete job in their rush, and she nearly fell through an enormous tree-sized hole in the middle of the bridge. We'll have to deal with them later. Curiosity bubbling deep inside, an abrupt ringing intensifies in my ears. Wincing, I shake my head in response to the pain of the sudden sound. Think has been right since the night before, as if the storm has slightly cracked my reality and I haven't the tools to fix it. Am I hearing mangroves? Yes, I want to know. Why does Akula keep appearing to me like this? Perhaps I'm just letting myself get distracted from my real work here. Realize I desperately need some rest. Small crabs emerging from the mangrove roots, waving their pinchers at me. Waves crashing on the beach. Hula and the mangroves carrying on their conversation in the background. Pain in my ears. All the sights and sounds intensify as thoughts reel through my mind about the breadfruit tree and the mounting need to just find the conference grounds and realign with my mission. Suddenly, a loud chorus of laughter arises from the mangrove forest, and it's the last sound I can endure. How can you laugh at a time like this? I retort furiously, my eyebrows knitted in strong rebuke. People all over this island have just lost their homes. Their livelihoods are at risk. They're searching for food, and it could take days, weeks for relief aid to. My hands up in the air. You do not care for the tragedy that's just taken place this morning. So insensitive to laugh amidst all the devastation. I can't tell you. You'll have to listen in a different way. They replies. Surprisingly serene, despite my outburst, which has even scared away the nearby crabs. I cannot understand why nothing and nobody are the way I anticipate, as if the storm has turned all sensibility on its head. We're trapped like Alice in an island version of Wonderland. Being listened differently, I say, exasperated. Nothing is how you would expect, so you have to act unexpectedly. Then it will make more sense, she replied. Stared at her blankly, waiting for her to explain her gibberish. All you have to do is put your head in water. As your ears are submerged, you'll be able to hear them more clearly. Sound takes on a different quality under the water. All the whispers of the mangrove will become clearer to understand once your ears are no longer big. Since childhood, I've always disliked having my head submerged this way. Neither have I taken to opening my eyes underwater. Submersion experiences have always been met with eyes screwed tight shut, fingers in my ears to avoid the glug, glug, glug of water in my ear canal. Swimming, even bath times, were always a displeasure to me. So just my head, I clarify. Seriously, what do you need to do for now? She confirms. And they will be able to speak to me at length rather than whisper. This is why you were experiencing so much ringing in your ears, Lila continued. When you and I met in your dream, this activated a new sense, a new kind of listening skill. But your body is taking some time to adapt and it's causing pain and loud ringing. This will diminish once your head is underwater. The mangroves asked me to activate this within you. We figured it would be easier for you if you and I first met in a dream. This wasn't the original plan, but when the storm took a rapid turn in the night, we ran out of time to bring you on board, Jen. So we decided that the first encounter would need to be in a dream. Humans have the capacity to listen this way, but they don't know it, so they don't try. What must have been slight terror in my eyes, I waded into the water up to hip depth. Curiosity about hearing the mangroves, outweighing the uncertainty and fear, I began to put my head underwater as Akula instructed. My eyes, at first locked on Akula, chest hovering over the water, I pull back my hair and resist the urge to screw my eyes tight shut. It's less cold than I anticipated, yet I shudder as I lower my face below the surface, fixing my gaze on the mangrove roots and noticing the difference of appearance below the surface. I need to keep my ears open. I refrain from stopping them with my index fingers. Hey, I say, just a whisper at first, air escaping my lungs and bubbling to the surface as I adjust the volume to my voice underwater. Sensation of breathing submerged, the most peculiar thing I've ever felt. Wanted to tell me a story about a crab? I say, partially scared, partially annoyed, but mostly concerned with how long I'll be able to remain underwater this way. Yes, it's an anecdote from a village in the southeast of Vetilevu, Fiji's largest island. It's a funny story about sharks, the mana, and the kuka. Know what those are? Yeah, they're types of crab. The mana is a large swamp crab and the kuka is a much smaller crab. Indeed. So, some years ago, after the serious cyclone, the rivers of Vetilevu began to flood. 2 other rivers spilled into the Rewa, where the banks were overflowing into the villages. Thankfully, many of the homes in this area are built up high on stilts, sparing some families from losing everything. People there were accustomed to flooding, but this was on another scale altogether. One particular homeowner pushed open his window, looked down underneath his stilted home, and was brought to laughter by what he saw. I looked down on the ground and I saw the sharks meeting under my house, he said with laughter. The mana was standing there, holding onto the side of the door, and just behind him was the kuka doing press-ups behind him, trying to get on the platform. Away from the water. I mean, it was so high that the sharks could come under my house and hold a meeting there. Imagining that scene makes us laugh. Yeah, that's pretty comical, I reluctantly admit. The idea that sharks and crabs and what the storm does affects them too, bringing them into the homes that they wouldn't normally visit. Starting to acclimate to this conversation with the mangroves, I decide to ask some questions. I'm confused. Why are you so upbeat and full of laughter when the island has just been devastated by the storm? Might say that it's disrespectful to be so lighthearted in the wake of such a disaster. The mangroves reply, we don't see the cyclones and the flooding only as disaster. There are positive things that can come from these natural occurrences. It's not simply a time to mourn. No, sometimes in our traditional folk tales, these natural occurrences, the things that you are accustomed to calling disasters, are actually understood as gifts of reciprocity. But then as it continues, the Strafe and the Mangroves carry on talking about this idea that natural disasters can actually be reciprocity events, and they share another story from Fiji, a folktale, just that. And so this is bringing out some of the main findings from the doctoral work, which is about having faith in nature and trusting nature to take its course with certain things, but also to resist this idea of like strong fear responses to climate change, that actually, and this is kind of my contribution, especially to the new story element of this, is that humanity is not designed, it's okay, humanity is not designed to be perpetually held in this kind of fear narrative about climate change, and probably that's kind of run its course. Its utility is out. That in order actually to respond to the Anthropocene, we're going to have to do so from a different place, not from this fight or flight response, because humans don't do well being held in that kind of place for overly long. So some of the other messages that come out in the dissertation, but more so in the novel, is about responding from a place of relationship and love as a way to, as a more long-term approach to overcoming climate change and the Anthropocene. Okay, I'm doing a lot of new meetings. So. Okay, coming away from the stories a little bit, I want to share a few of the concepts that underpin the work that I do and some of the things that I'm trying to do now with the novel. So the title of the talk is about large ocean states, making it through the Anthropocene through Thrutopia, okay? And I talked about genre blend. I want to talk about that. And so, yeah. First, I choose not to use, I mean, more and more as time goes on, I choose to not use the label of small island developing state. And that's influenced by and large from Apele Heofa, an indigenous writer from the Pacific who's no longer with us anymore. But he has a great way of beautifully turning this on its head and reminding us that these are not small island developing states, they're large ocean states, okay? So it's a really very strong post-colonial critique of the way, in particular, that the international development community relates to islands. And so I choose more and more to use the term large ocean states, and I'm seeing this coming up more in the discourse, international discourse as well, and even in places like the COP and other global deliberations are starting to use the term large ocean state rather than small island state. I just love this book. Has anyone read The Way of Weird by Brian Bates? You have.
Very, very well done.
Okay, it is such a fantastic book, and it really inspired me. Well, after I submitted my dissertation in 2019, I read this book, and I was just captured by the title of it. But so Brian Bates is a retired professor from the University of Sussex, and he researches kind of like Anglo-Saxon Middle Earth time, and he's interested in I always use the wrong word. So interested in psychology, shamanism, sorcery. And so he did this piece of archival research to try to understand some Anglo-Saxon approaches to psychological and spiritual liberation. And instead of writing up his research, he found a piece of archival text, and he did this 5-year project about it. And instead of writing it up as a journal article, as we tend to do in the field of academia, he wrote up the findings about healing practices in this time period in England as a novel. And it's a very, hero's journey kind of story about 2 main characters. And I was really inspired by this and the idea of like blending these genres, academic research and the novel. I like to use the word "aka novel." I don't think that's not a real word, that's my word. So I feel like that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the novel that I'm writing, is rather than publish out of the PhD in the kind of typical places of academic journals and academic textbooks. I'm reframing the findings through more of a mythical journey. This is very much a mythical journey. And I probably do about a 2-hour-long talk about how I've used this book methodologically to write what I'm writing now. But Brian Bates, if he's out there, this is probably the book I've read the most times of any book in my life. And then there's this concept also of Thrutopia. Is anyone familiar with the author Amanda Scott? She wrote the Boudica series. Probably some of you have read those texts. Thrutopia is not her concept, but she works really to promote. This is a genre of writing, like a newly emerging genre of writing. It's an answer to dystopian text. It's it's writers saying, okay, we're tired with zombie apocalypse dystopian stories about how humanity is doomed to die and how we aren't, we're just going to morph into some technological different answer going forward. She's promoting this concept of Thrutopia as a way to, how will humanity make it through the Anthropocene? How do we make it through the current state of affairs that we find ourselves? So it's a kind of new genre, and I feel like that's what I'm also trying to do. It's a heroine's journey. It's a Thrutopia of how do we learn from the voices of those at the sharp end of climate change to reorient the way that we address climate change. Those are 3 main concepts that I'm. So moving from academic writing into fiction publishing was really via the methodological approach of narrative inquiry. There's a quote here from Richardson and Adam Sankier about, rather than suppressing our voices, authors are finding new ways of writing, particularly in the academic space. I've talked about genre blending, this novella already. But why else am I choosing to publish the findings and to elaborate the findings in the form of a novel? One is about character development. This piece of work is, like I said, a layered text. It's like a choppy, different types of text, and there wasn't very much space to develop the characters. But in the novel, I'm developing the characters of the protagonists more. I'm giving more space and understanding to who is the dogfish woman, the Kula. Who are the mangroves? What do they want? And giving them more character and making it more of a mythical tale. It's perhaps most importantly about sharing stories that I heard and I understood through the many conversations that I had in my fieldwork that didn't even make it into the thesis. There were a lot of things that I didn't have space to do in the thesis. And I felt like it was ethically quite important for me to revisit some of those stories, some of those conversations, and to bring them forward. So I want to read one of those next. This is the 3rd and final excerpt that I'm going to read for you today. Is from the island of St. Lucia. It's a story that emerged from a focus group that I had about rainwater harvesting, and I didn't get a chance to write about it in the dissertation, in the thesis. So here it is now. So it's mostly strafe and the mangroves, but then there's this intergenerational family that is observed, and so you'll hear their voices as well. Okay, starting with the mangroves. Fine, we'll be safe, urged the mangroves as I looked up skeptically. This time I have to put more than my head underwater to retrieve a story, I asked. Will it come in a flash? Because I can't hold my breath for that long, and why can't I use a snorkel? You must retrieve the story from the bottom. You must be under to hear the voices. Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Kula, the dogfish woman, has granted you a transfiguration lesson. Listen, mangroves encouraged. You ever had a dream that a flood or a tsunami is coming and there's no way you can avoid going underwater, and once you're submerged, you find you can breathe normally? Yeah, I replied. I've had dreams like that before. You already have the gift. now enhanced by Akula. You don't need to worry, Mangrove encouraged. Once you're underwater, you'll find that it's like a portal and you'll be able to observe from dry land. Trust. Want to learn our experiences, you need to trust us, and we need to trust you. With less trepidation than I'd had at the start of the conversation, I decided to try. I was, after all, already speaking to Mangrove, something that the previous day I would have thought impossible. So I decided to suspend my limiting beliefs again. I dropped into the water and began to swim down, gently using the submerged mangrove tendrils to navigate to the bottom of the lagoon. I could hear the faint sound of children playing and followed the laughter until, just as the mangrove had foretold, I found myself walking on dry land. And there before me was a grandfather and some helpers, wrangling a water collection tank into place beside his single-story house. Others were on the roof, carefully installing a new guttering system with filters that would feed down onto the collection tank. Children, come here and give your grandfather a hand, Elder beckoned. The brother and sister quit their game of ball in the ground over grass and rushed over eager to help. That rain cloud up there, he said, motioning with his head. We're gonna catch it. Catch it? The girl repeated excitedly. Grandfather, you're a fisherman. You catch fish, not clouds. And you don't have a net big enough to catch that cloud. Lately, neither have I been catching fish, since that strange seaweed was blocking up our waterways. Children both pinched their noses and closed and made disgusted faces before bursting out into laughter. It was true that recently an accumulation of seaweed had been causing a really bad smell from the coast. Today we're going to catch water. He paused for a moment, thinking about how the water rationing on the island had gotten tighter and tighter in recent months, with barely enough for cooking and household chores. As he rubbed his aching neck, he contemplated how much fresh water got put onto each cruise ship. Docked each week, felt the frustration rise in his chest at the fact that he and his neighbors were going without daily flowing water, while the tourists upon those floating paradises were taking multiple showers a day. Never mind that for now, he thought to himself. Today, I'm doing something about my family's needs. Tell me, children, what do you know about the water cycle? I know all about the water cycle, grandmother, responded the boy proudly. We're learning about it at school, about transpiration, evaporation. Very good, encouraged the grandfather. And what about you, little one? He rubbed his granddaughter's cheek. I know I like to splash in puddles, she squealed, but lately it had not rained much. How brown the grass was gotten. Yes, but soon we're going to have a good rainfall, and we're going to get this guttering and tank installed just in time to capture what we can from the skies. Then we can make puddles anytime we want? She asked expectantly. We'll have to see about that, huh? Grandmother comes outside to inspect the progress, eager that the project finishes before the forecasted rainfall later in the day. Children, your grandfather and I had these kinds of rainwater tanks on our houses when we were your age. Everyone on the island did, but your father up there, she points to one of the men working on the roof. This is the first time he's used one. Hey, grandmother, asked the little one curiously. Did the grass get brown and the water stop coming through the pipes when you were a little girl too? This was before we had pipes in our house, see? It wasn't that long ago that the only water system we had was what we could collect from the rain. And then the planners from the towns came and started putting piped water systems all over the island. Had indoor plumbing, indoor bathrooms for the first time, but it didn't come cheap. So why did you do it if it was so expensive? Well, somebody decided that outdoor plumbing meant our island was poor. And they gave the city planners and leaders money to put in these water systems, and people stopped using rainwater harvesting systems. So where did all the water go, Grandma? Why do we only get water for a few hours a day now? Well, that's partly because of the drought, but also because of the leaks and because we sell some of our water to the cruise ships. So now Somebody else has come along to the island, convinced the city planners that it's more ecologically advanced to use rainwater harvesting systems like this one, and giving us loans to install. We knew what we were doing all along, huh? Says grandfather, looking at the children. Telling us back our own know-how. Grandmother scoffs as she strides back into the house. Dad, are there any more clamps down there in that kit? Shouts the children's father from up on the roof. Here, scamper on up the ladder and take these to your father, says Granddad, handing some clamps to his daughter. Work quick, we can catch that red clamp. I feel the water on my feet, but it is not. It's the lagoon closing in around me, and I begin to rise back up to the top, seen before me gently disappearing, and I hear thunder in the far distance as I emerge from the water, still breathing only, sea water dripping from my hair, but I settle on the sturdy mangrove root, contemplate what I just saw. So then there's critique there to be had about the way that the international development community has resold traditional knowledge back to people who abandoned it for some time. And that's also an important message that came out from the fieldwork that I wanted to bring out in this novel. So what comes next is I'm about 2/3 finished with the manuscript. So I'm finishing up now. I've got a map of where I'm going with it or what's being through. And I'm working on completing the messages from the mangroves about how we reach the other side of the Anthropocene with their viewpoints and perspectives. And I'm looking for the right publishing house. To me, this is really important because, as I said, this is kind of blended genre. It's not strictly a piece of fiction, but it's not strictly a piece of research either. So if you know anyone that is excited about this type of writing that I should be put in contact with, that would be great to be linked up with a publishing house that is experimental in this way and is publishing on Anthropocene and using kind of Thrutopia genre. So I publish on my personal Instagram little vignettes from time to time. So that's one way to follow what's happening if you want to follow me on Terra_earthhealer. That's not me healing the earth. I just want to clarify that's healing with earth. It's about reciprocal relationship, not claiming a role with that Instagram handle. And I am working on developing a Substack as another way to stay in touch with readership. So please, there's some references and some links to other things and my contact information here and a link to the doctoral thesis. So thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you, Terra. Let's just give a look around of applause. I was there and so you can get your advanced orders in for the forthcoming novel. Maybe we use our website to get a list of orders for your forthcoming novel. Thank you for telling us stories today. I mean, you have been telling stories to the people in the room and to the people online. Thank you for that. But you've been doing much more than that, of course. You've been breaking some boundaries, different boundaries, breaking traditional academic sort of scholarship boundaries, the boundaries between creative writing and academic writing, and so much more. I just wanted to flag sort of three sort of areas: arts-based research, indigenous knowledge, island states worldviews, and then the human-earth relationship. Those are all some of the big issues that Terra's been really talking about today. So we've got time for questions. We started 5 minutes late, so we're going to run at least 5 minutes beyond 1 o'clock, which was our original finishing time. And I think the best way to do this is to look at people online first and maybe take 2 or 3 questions or comments if we do have some. And I need Seekan's help on that to identify who might have put a hand up out online. And we'll take a couple or 3 questions or comments from in the room as well. But let's go with the ones from online as they're so far away at the moment.
We're not recording the Q&A, thanks. So
you're free to
you won't be recorded if you want to ask questions.
We've recorded the full session, but not the discussion now.
Yes, yeah.
The full